Hello, and welcome to the next tour with
Ian?
and Andia. We're happy to have you here with us today on episode 15, Transition and State Veteran Resources. You'd think I could remember that, but I didn't.
That's all good.
So thanks for being here with us today, and Ian will introduce our guest.
Absolutely. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to welcome a wonderful mentor and very distinguished guest on our show. We are joined today by Todd McCaffrey. He is a retired Major General, served 34 years in the U.S. Army, retired in the fall of 2020. I had the privilege and distinction to work for General McCaffrey when I was assigned to U.S. AFRICOM. But we're not actually here to talk with him today about his role in the Army. We're actually here to talk with him about his current role, where he was appointed as Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs for the state of South Carolina. Incredible role, Mr. Secretary. Welcome. It's great to have you here, sir.
Hey, thanks, Ian. Andy, appreciate it very much. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you today.
Definitely.
We're so excited. I think this is going to be a really great conversation. I'm super excited.
Absolutely.
Hey, well, I just wanted to let you know, I've had a chance to listen to several of your podcasts, and I got to tell you, I wish when I was transitioning 5 years ago, I had known this was out there because I have stepped on every landmine that you can do in the transition process. So what you all are doing is really great stuff for transitioning service members and veterans. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Well, and likewise, sir, thank you so much for the feedback on that. We really appreciate it. And because you stepped on every landmine, proverbially, I think that really suits you well to lead the Department of Veterans Affairs for the state in which you reside, because you are able to then foresee, what those service members, veterans, families are facing as they come out of uniform. And what a unique perspective and opportunity. So if you like, sir, let's just go ahead and dive right in.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so as folks get out of uniform, we've already talked a lot on this podcast and others about the big federal Department of Veterans Affairs. They learn about it. They have a whole section that's mandated by Congress through transition assistance or the TAP program. But we wanted to talk about states, territories, the different VA programs that don't necessarily sync with big VA and the federal. Can you talk a little bit about maybe what veterans, their families, and dependents are missing out on with state resources?
Yeah, sure. I think it's an important topic because the reality is that most veterans, I think, do not recognize that every state and territory, all 54 states and territories across the United States, have some cabinet agency, a division, some office set up to support veterans in that area. And frankly, it's rather unknown. And most of the transition assistance program classes that I'm aware of don't present that, at least don't highlight on it. So veterans often have to find their way to that capability. And that's unfortunate because once they do, it opens up great opportunities that can be more assistive at the local level. So yeah, it's not an area that most veterans know about. I certainly did not. And I'll tell you, I'll give you an example. I didn't know there was a state office. I didn't know there was a county office. And interestingly, most states, there's an office at the county level even as well. So until you stumble on those, you're not aware of that capability.
Wow. Yeah.
I think that's so important. And I think that it's really interesting too, because I think when you dig into and learn or thinking about going to a state, but also like keeping up with those states and the things that they're doing, because even just in the time that you've retired, we're in Virginia, and there's been new benefits, different benefits, a potential change in benefits. And so there's been a lot of things going on. And so keeping apprised of all of that in your state is, really vitally important.
Yeah, and you know what you find, so veterans will understand, first, we all understand which states tax military retire pay if you're retired from the military. But if you're not retiring, it's often you don't know what benefits are out there. So if you're a staff sergeant or a Navy chief who's getting out earlier than retirement, it's often hard to figure out what state benefits might be available for that individual who doesn't have the luxury, if you will, of having for receiving the tax fees. That's the one most veterans know about. We all kind of know which states tax military retire pay, which ones do not, and which ones are planning to try to not tax retire pay. But it's the benefits for those who have transitioned before retirement that are often pretty opaque, and it takes a little bit of research.
Yeah. So digging into that, I think, what are some of the benefits? I know when we kind of did our prep call for this, we talked a lot about not only what South Carolina provides, but, you're really close with some of the other state secretaries and understand, the differences. But what are some of those benefits that are provided for veterans, for their families, different maybe disability ratings, and how should they connect with that office?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so I think, first of all, recognize, a lot of times the states, I know my state does, and I know other states do, they hinge many of their state level benefits on the veteran's VA disability rating. So the higher the disability rating of the VA, often the more opportunities and avenues it opens up for veteran services. So in my state, for example, a veteran who's rated 100% permanent total disabled has a huge number of benefits. So that veteran could have served for 3 years or 30 years, but if
Hmm.
100% under the VA disability rating scale, they gain free college tuition for all of their kids to state funded universities. They waive property tax. They waive vehicle taxes. These are huge issues. Other states have a graduated approach to that. So you'll find
Hmm.
states where, it doesn't require 100% to gain access to benefits. It requires 50 or 60%. The point being, those are areas where I think the veteran needs to do a little bit of research to figure out what's at the state level and how does it affect him or her. And then, most states, of course, have benefits like license plate issues, those sort of things. And those sometimes carry benefits themselves. I'll give you one more example. In South Carolina, if you're license plate if you have particular military awards that you've been granted, or again, you're disabled, you can waive municipal parking fees. You can park at downtown parking meters without having to pay the rate. I mean,
Nice.
these are kind of hidden benefits that are out there, but they're state level. They're not ones at the federal level.
Right.
Sometimes they're snap linked, if you will, to what the federal disability rate is. In other cases, they're not. They're standalone based on service, depending on the state or the territory. But the veterans got to do a little bit of work to kind of find out, what those are.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Yeah, and I think a cool one here that you found out about was the state hunting and fishing license.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
It's a great one. And, park access, all those kind of things that are out there. There are a bunch of services that kind of rate states based on veteran friendliness, those kind of things. And they use different criteria. And those are a good point of departure, a good place for veterans to start, kind of Google into those things and find them. But often you got to go to the state website or the state office to figure out, what's the specific issues that my particular state or territory might offer me because of my military service.
Absolutely. And you bring out a really good phrase right there. You talk about like, military friendliness. And as we've unpacked a little bit about, things like, the disability ratings and the things that can kind of monetarily come with that, I'd like to kind of maybe transition just a little bit into, as we've talked before, your shuns, if you will, the three pillars of transition: location, vocation, compensation. And I think those are probably even more important to initially think about as a veteran on where you want to live, because we've all heard if you can nail at least two of those, you're doing really well. If you can get all three, which is going to take some work on the front end, that's huge. So can you maybe unpack a little bit how those factor into hiring initiatives that your office works on, for example, particularly at the state level, because you want to attract and recruit talent, if I'm not mistaken.
We sure do. And I got to tell you, so I think all my counterparts in my position, other states say the same thing. While we're in the veteran business of providing benefits to veterans and supporting, we're also in the talent acquisition, economic development business. We want veteran talent to come to our states and
Mhm.
territories because of what they bring to the workforce. And so I would offer, before I kind of talk about the shuns, I would frame there's three types of transition service members. There's the transition service member who's getting out of the military, say in Virginia, and says, I'm staying in Virginia. That's where I'm going to be. That's my location, if you will. There's the veteran who's getting out of the military and says, I'm going home. I'm going back to Washington State, or I'm coming to South Carolina. And then there's the third veteran who's the most flexible, and they'll go, I'll go wherever I get the best offer. They're the undecided voter, if you will. So the shuns relate to these things, and you mentioned them. When you transition from the military, I would offer, you've got three large buckets. You got to figure out, what you want to focus. Where do you want to be? What do you want to do, and how much do I need to make? Unless you're willing to be completely an undecided voter and go where you get the best of all three, the reality
Mm-hmm.
is you got to make trades. And so if you're saying, I'm coming to South Carolina and that's where I'm going to be, you may have to make some trade-offs in terms of how much money you're going to make in after military service, and potentially what opportunities are out there for you. So it's this kind of optimizing process, if you will, for every veteran who goes through that process. And we all do it. Some of us do it knowingly. Some of us do it just because it just occurs to us. But it's an important consideration, I think, as people transition out of the military, whether it's after a single term of service or after a full career of service. So it's just one of the things we all have to go through. And I think being aware that you're doing it deliberately, as opposed to just kind of backing yourself in, is helpful in terms of the decision process.
Absolutely. And I think Andy has got a bit of a follow on, but I think it's important to foot stomp something that you said there, is that, you know, all of these state and territory level, and even down to the counties, for example, those offices are in talent acquisition. So I think that's a huge message for the audience and for those that are looking on what's next for them. Leverage those resources and reach out, because those offices, your office, they want to help the service members and their families as they move out, because that's important. It's economic impact. It's schools. It's so much more than just what meets the eye for the individual. And I really, really appreciate you highlighting that. And I think that, again, that's worth noting again.
I mean,
You
you
know,
did kind of stomp on my question, but it's okay. We'll just keep going. No, but I think it's important and to know like how your office does work with families and veterans, that are coming to your state that are looking for work, and how does your office actually work in that space?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think every state does a little bit differently. In our state, for example, we have a coordinated interagency process that we work with the Department of Employment and Workforce and the Department of Commerce and others to try to attract talent, not just for veteran talent, but workforce talent all together. What veterans bring to the table in that space is rather unique, though. And I'd say this all the time to every audience I talk to. Veterans bring three things to the workforce that not everyone else does. One, they have a self-discipline because of military service. Second, they know how to work on a team. And thirdly, they've demonstrated the ability of being trained on skills and attributes they did not have before military service.
Hmm.
No one goes into the Air Force knowing how to hang a bomb on an airplane. No one goes to the Army knowing how to drive a tank. Yeah, that's right. That's not something you're taught in the high school voc tech kind of thing. The fact that these are all skills that they've learned, and so those are things that employers want to have. So what we do at our level as it relates to veterans is we work closely with Department of Employment and Workforce, particularly one, number understand who are the veterans, how do we attract veterans to the state, and then how can we place them in positions. So here and other states have done this. We're building the interagency process is building an entry portal, a job portal, if you will, to help align talent. And it does things like it'll read a service member's record or their transcript, if you will, to help identify where their training and education might align with job opportunities in the state. All the states are doing these things in different ways, and the veterans got to go to the state website and kind of identify what's available there. And I think they can do a really good job of identifying what might be available to a particular state where they want to go or they're considering to go.
Mhm.
As part of that whole kind of shun, discussion.
The
The
shuns.
shuns.
I love that.
Yeah.
If you take, we should have renamed the episode. If you take anything away, look at the shuns. But I think, well, first of all, I think it goes without saying that it is really impressive what the states and the counties do to support veterans and military service members. I mean, and the families, like I really feel it here in Virginia. I feel it from you. I'm sure, everybody in South Carolina feels it. But I think it's fantastic that they have set up these programs to make it welcoming for veterans and their families. And that's so important and not go unthank you'd, whatever it is I'm trying to say here. But I think it's impressive. And I think those things exist for a reason and they should be sought out and utilized. And that's how they keep going and getting better.
Absolutely. And I'll offer this to anybody listen. I think the one thing veterans should recognize, no matter what the state benefit provides, the foundational benefit they want to latch into what the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs provides, those pieces. Your foundation, if you will, for transition ought to be the VA. And there's reasons for that. Number one, the VA is not going anywhere. It's going to be around in perpetuity. So it's a solid foundation to build upon. And then you can build on the state benefits and the county benefits that might come on top of that. But start with the VA. And importantly, that also extends to spouses as well. Spouses can find opportunities in that area. And the last one I'd mention that I did not have any idea that existed was a program called the Veteran Business Outreach Center, the VBOC. It's a small business administration funded program, and it focuses on helping veterans gain the skills for entrepreneurial activities. And most states have a VBOC office, and they provide free training to veterans in entrepreneurship, gaining access to capital, how to stand up a business plan, all those kind of things that are important if you're a veteran who wants to start, a brewery or a podcast, or something like that. So it's a great, again, all these things that are available to veterans that are often a couple layers below the surface. They have to be kind of, searched for a bit.
Wow, that's really cool. I've heard in different levels about business opportunities at the state level, but I didn't realize that every state had that. So that's awesome.
Yeah, in some states, I think you'll find a VBOC office will cover regional areas, so they'll cover multiple states. We have one in South Carolina that covers just South Carolina, but it's a great capability. Again, another thing, part of the minefield that I stepped through. I had no idea that was out there, and I wish I did at the time when I was transitioning.
Absolutely. Well, the way you described, I'm a visual learner and I love euphemisms. If you recall from my time at AFRICOM, sir, I think the way that you really described this last bit is, in F-150 is the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, but how you trim it out. Do you want the Lariat? Do you want the King Ranch? Whatever the case may be. Do you want the bigger fuel tank? All this. That's the state, territory, county pieces that you outfit that best suits what you're going after, I think. And I think they have to work hand in glove. And if I'm taking anything away from this, yeah, get that foundation, but without the house built on it, without the trim levels that you want, really you're missing out on a lot.
That's a great metaphor, Ian. I think that's a great way to describe it because it does that. We spent a lot of time, my agency, talking about this. The thing we do foundationally is assist veterans gain access to the benefits to which they are entitled. And what I often tell audiences, recognize entitlement is a statutory term. You are entitled by law to these benefits because of your service. But what I also say is veterans deserve much more than which they are entitled. And so that's the kind of the layering of the cake that goes on top of that. And that's where you'll find states and territories and even counties provide different layers of that cake. And so the veteran who's willing to shop around, if you will, to find the best deal for him or her, you may find your foundational benefits don't change at all no matter where you go, but it's the things you can find on top of that may be of interest. And again, that gets back into your flexibility on location, vocation, and compensation kind of pieces. But these are the decision processes I think veterans have to go through as they're looking to transition out of the military. To be quite honest, I'm not sure that our transition assistance programs do this as well as they could for a whole bunch of reasons. That's why guys like me and my counterparts have got to help reach out and attract talent to our states because we certainly want them to be here.
Absolutely.
Well, I think one of the interesting things you told us too is that you don't get like a list from Big VA about who all your veterans are in your state for you to be able to reach out to, right? So that's always a constant way that all of us need to be making sure that we communicate. And, anybody that's working in this space, making sure that we encourage folks to reach out to those state offices, county offices, and whatnot to make sure they know who you are too.
That's a really important point. And because what you're right, we don't get a list saying, hey, these are all the veterans of transitioning coming to South Carolina. There's a whole process. The veteran has to opt in on the information being shared before they transition. That gets kind of wonky. So we generally often don't know about a veteran until they make a demand signal. They kind of raise their hand and say, hey, can you help me here? Then we know they're there. So what we tell veterans in transition is, hey, if you haven't opted into sharing your information with the state, please make a demand signal to get to the state. Contact the county office if there is one. Contact the state office, which there will be one. Highlight that, and then you're connected, and then you can begin to network through the community of veterans that are out there, and equally importantly, where it exists in almost every state, this rich, tableau of veteran nonprofits that support veteran needs in more niche areas. And that's an important component. And it's not VA, but it's in these kind of VSOs that are out there trying to do the things for veterans, everything from fly fishing to job placement and workforce development.
Absolutely. Well, and you make again yet another incredible point. It's making connections that beget other connections that beget other connections.
Mhm.
And that's what it's all about. That network, that spider web is so important to make sure that, that the veteran starts it. And so if you're out there in virtual land listening to this or watching this, do it. Reach out, make those connections because it's only going to benefit you and your family.
Absolutely. And I just tell you, and what makes veterans really good at this, they've been doing this their entire time in service. They are self-starters as a group. And so, what you find with self-starting kind of individuals, they find their way to these programs, which is again, why, I'll put my plug in for South Carolina. This is why we want transition service members to consider coming to South Carolina, because we want your talent. We're a growing state. We need it. Now, my counterparts in Georgia, Florida, and North Carolina be saying the same thing.
Good. Healthy competition is always good.
Ziegler there in Virginia is saying the same thing as well. So we have this conversation all the time. But yeah, absolutely. We want that talent.
Definitely. Well, I can unequivocally say that the veterans in the Palmetto State are under exceptionally good care with your leadership, sir. Thank you so much for taking the time today to unpack a little bit about what state, territory, county, locality benefits mean that augment and supplement and enhance what the foundational U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs benefits do for veterans and their families across the board. Again, get out there, take a look, folks. You've heard it right here from the man himself, somebody who's leading a state. It's vitally important that you leverage those entitlements and find out those other benefits that are out there for you. So kind of to that answer, any parting shots before we kind of get into the fun portion?
Anything we forgot?
Or
Yeah.
what we may have forgot that you want to highlight?
One point I do want to highlight, and it's what I call the veteran narrative. And this is for your listeners who are not necessarily veterans themselves or have military experience, may stumble upon this piece. There is a very rich nonprofit community out there that supports veterans, and often they focus on what I call the ills of military service, post-traumatic stress, homelessness, these kind of, which are real issues for a segment of the veteran community, which we cannot ignore, and we have to do everything we can to support. But it's also important to recognize that's not representative of the broader veteran community. And too often, if you listen too much to that narrative, you wind up with this kind of idea that veterans are a broken class, which is not true. And we spend a lot of time trying to educate audience as the military has gotten smaller and America has less direct contact with their military. Is recognize service in the military results in positive outcomes, not negative outcomes, by and large, 98% of the time. And that's an important piece to recognize because that encourages future military service, which is valuable. And it also highlights the fact that what veterans are bringing to the workforce and to the states, and I always say this, veterans produce more than they consume. And that's an important takeaway for people to recognize about the veterans that serve this country, particularly on weekends like this, as we consider those who have given the ultimate sacrifice for our nation.
Well said, sir. Couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you so much for highlighting that. That's incredibly important words. So excellent. Well, sir, so
fun parts.
Fun parts. So let's transition off of that.
Actually, this whole thing has been fun.
This has been and incredibly informative. I can't tell you how great it is to unpack something that I think, I would venture to say 85% of our veterans don't know, as just they don't know that these state, territory, and local benefits are out there.
I mean, I just learned something new today, and we've been talking about this multiple times. Yeah, it's awesome.
Super.
Sorry, go ahead, sir.
No, go ahead. Great.
All right, so we're going to now play a game called What's in Your Rucksack. So I know with your time in the Army, you definitely know what a rucksack is, but we're going to flip this a little bit and do it into two parts. One thing that you would definitely carried with you out of military service that you value still to this day, and then one thing that you just chucked by the wayside when you took that uniform off. So over to you, sir. What's in your rucksack?
Yeah, so I thought a lot about this because the thing is I've got a big rucksack. I spent a lot of time in uniforms. My rucksack's big and it's probably heavy. What I take from that rucksack, I think that all applies to veterans, is one, this idea of self-discipline and work ethic, which I think we build in the military. I think those are incredibly valuable. They translate well to the civilian workforce, but those are things that veterans have in spades. They are disciplined. They've learned, they've imbued discipline since they entered the basic training or whatever. So I would take that as my take. What I'd probably leave behind a little bit, and I'd encourage others, is, the military, the longer you're in it, you're steeped in this hierarchy. And we kind of get into this kind of culture of hierarchy. And sometimes I find that's not as valuable when you leave in the transition piece. I mean, I retired as a flag officer, which is great. I'm very proud of that. But the fact is I'm still Todd to people, the people I work with. So it's, that's a different kind of governance process in the civilian world. I think veterans have got to understand that the rules are different. There's still hierarchy, to be sure, but it's just the way the culture characterized. And I think sometimes veterans can do well to leave a little bit of that back in the rucksack and maybe take the self-discipline, leave some of the structure and hierarchy back where you left it in uniform.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, those are great words. Really appreciate that. I learned that the hard way, getting into my civilian career, following the uniform, calling everybody by their first name was a challenge to begin with, but it works well because I think you humanize, the connective tissue between you and your colleagues, which is vitally important, of course.
Absolutely. It really is. Yeah. I still have my problem. I've worked amongst all these military veterans, my staff, and they're still very structured. They're wonderful people, but that's just one of those things we got to work on over time.
Old habits die hard.
I think I'm going to go back through this episode and see how many times Ian
I know.
sir.
It happens to these guys that serve a long time too. That's the problem. We're all running.
Definitely.
That's right.
It's never a bad thing to have respect though. Like for sure. So awesome. Very good words and great points that you brought up there. So I get to bring us to the next game, which is our 2 truths and a lie military style. So our last guest was Brandon Levinger, and I had the pleasure of meeting Brandon a few years ago through a conference called Mill Money Con, and he runs a website and a full, he has videos and blogs and lots of information about financial readiness called Enlisted Money. So that was a great episode. But his two truths and a lie. Ready? You get to guess. I have worked at 2 different grocery stores. 2, I have worked at 3 different Christmas tree farms. And number 3 is I have worked at 4 small engine repair shops. So which is the lie? I know they're so random.
I guess I'm going to take the 4 engine repair shops as the untruth. I won't call it a
That
lie.
was actually true.
Jeez.
And it was funny because after we were done recording, Ian and I both guessed that it was the 3 different Christmas tree farms. And I said, I think maybe you only worked at 2. And he was like, yeah, that was right. And exactly right. So that was his lie. He only worked at 2 Christmas tree farms.
Yeah, random.
That's 2 more than I have.
That's right.
Me too. So that was really fun. So now it is your turn. So your 2 truths and a lie, military style, and then we will reveal this on our next episode. So nobody gets to guess now, but we'll reveal it on our next episode.
Okay. Well, the first was at one point I wore a Navy uniform. I was a midshipman in Navy ROTC my first year of college.
Okay.
My second one is my family and I moved 19 times in 34 years.
Okay.
All right.
And the third one was we were assigned to duty locations in Korea, the United States, and Germany.
Those are all very plausible.
Yeah, they are. I think I know which one it is, but we'll guess after this.
All right.
We'll reveal on the next episode.
You bet.
Again, so to our guest, Todd McCaffrey, General, Mr. Secretary, thank you again, sir, for all of this. Really appreciate it. Again, tremendous episode. Really appreciate you doing this. And again, folks, get out there and check out those resources. Connect with your states, territories, counties, what have you. And you're going to find that folks want you to be there and they want you to be around. And they're going to just pour their hearts and everything else out to you. So with that, I think we'll wrap it up. And yeah.
Thanks for being here, Todd. It was really great. Very informative, like I said. And to our listeners and viewers out there, please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, also YouTube and Spotify. Make sure that you've subscribed to the channel so you'll get updates whenever we drop a new episode. You can also find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Audible. Wait, I said Spotify. We're just powering through this one this time.
Amazon.
Thank you guys so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on the next tour.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
The views, opinions, and advice expressed by our guest on the next tour are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast, Ian, Andia, or any affiliated organizations. While we strive to provide helpful and accurate information, this podcast is for informational purposes only. We encourage listeners to consult with professionals or conduct their own research before making any significant decisions related to military transition or post-service life. The content is intended as guidance and personal perspective, not as official advice.